What's up, dudes and dudettes? Today we're gonna review AEW Fight Forever, specifically the Nintendo Switch version. Now, I don't have either of the other versions of Fight Forever, so I can't compare the Switch version to those, but from what I've read, there's basically no difference at all besides a couple of performance hiccups, which we'll talk about, plus the graphical downgrades, which, if we're honest, were not unexpected at all. So for starters, I would say AEW is the first actual wrestling game on the Switch that is not some weird gimmick or a performance nightmare. Previous to AEW on Switch, we've had Retromania, which is good for what it is, but it was too archaic for me. Before that, we had Wrestling Empire, which, while I admire the developer's passion, and while it was clearly a project that they loved working on, for my personal taste, I felt the gameplay was too random, and I just couldn't get into it. AEW Wrestling was fun, but had its issues as well. For example, anytime you click on the home button, it kicks you out of whatever match you're in and returns you to the main menu. So for someone who habitually pushes the home button to pause the game and do something else without having the in-game music distract you, that gets on your nerves real quick. We don't even have to talk about WWE 2K18 on the Switch because that piece of game. But AEW Fight Forever is the first wrestling game on the Switch that feels like a true competitor to the WWE games on other consoles. I like it, I think it's fun, but it has issues, and we're gonna talk about that here. AEW Fight Forever builds a solid foundation on top of which AEW games can continue to add features and improved mechanics. The gameplay is good. It's not a one-to-one recreation of the WWF No Mercy system like I was hoping it would be, but it does feel like a progression of the No Mercy system, though not a complete one as yet. Personally, I don't feel as though the No Mercy system needed any progression at all. It was perfect in the 2000s, and it still plays awesome today. As in No Mercy, you have weak grapples and strong grapples, and which grappling maneuver you perform depends on which side you tilt the left analog stick. You reverse grapples with the L button and strikes with the R button, just like in No Mercy. You can also hold either L or R buttons to make your wrestler stay in the blocking pose. While these homages to past classics are welcome, AEW does suffer from issues that can make it annoying to play in some areas. For instance, in hard mode, your opponents have a habit of running at you before the bell even rings to start the match. Other times, you can push the strike button and completely miss, even though your opponent is perfectly in range. Also, I don't particularly like how AEW counts the quality of your matches. In AEW Fight Forever, in order to get a high-ranking match, it seems like all you need to do is end the match as quickly as possible in a match that is as one-sided as possible. Well, if that's how the quality of a match is determined, then the Finger Poke of Doom is probably the best match of all time, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but I'd love it if the level of back and forth, reversals, and coming back and winning the match after a near defeat counted towards the overall ranking of a match. Instead, these things seem to negatively impact your match rating, performance. So let's get the big one out of the way. No, this is not another WWE 2K18 on Switch. AEW Fight Forever performs magnificently, and that's whether you have 2 people in the ring or 4. One performance hiccup I don't particularly like, though, is that when you're in the shop, if you have a bunch of money and you want to buy all the moves that are available to buy, there's no option to select everything at once, so you have to buy each of them individually, and it wouldn't be an issue if it were instantaneous. With each purchase, you have to hold the buy button, and then you have to wait a second or two for it to load the purchase before you can move on to the next one. So when there are dozens of things that you want to spend your cash on, that can get annoying really quickly. Also, in AEW Fight Forever, there's this weird skipping issue that happens frequently. You're almost guaranteed to experience it once or twice each match. It seems to be a Switch-specific issue as well. So for example, if you're performing a grappling move, you might see the beginning of the animation, but then suddenly, as if a bunch of frames were completely edited out, you magically end up at the end of the animation without seeing the full move on screen. I've also had a few crashes. This seems to happen mostly not long after going from docked mode into handheld mode, or from handheld mode into docked mode. Also, this might not be gameplay related, but it's impossible to ignore. Please make JR re-record his lines. Holy shit. He literally sounds like he's half asleep half the time, dude. Prior to the game's release, I was led to believe from other YouTubers that the story mode was similar to WWF No Mercy's. That's not the case whatsoever, believe me. I played the hell out of WWF No Mercy story mode, and this ain't that. Though that doesn't mean it's bad, so for the story mode, you can use anyone from the AEW roster, or you can use your own created wrestler. That's what I opted to do. Between shows, you can do certain activities such as working out, dining at some restaurants, and playing a minigame from which you can earn skill points. That's all well and good, but personally, I believe that instead of adding all of these weird inclusions like skill points, which really just make the game a bit more of a chore, they should have instead just made a story mode that really was more like No Mercy's, wherein you get to play the actual AEW storylines. So for someone like me, who admittedly is not the biggest AEW mark, that would be a great way to get newbies to know who your wrestlers are. So my hope is that in the future development of AEW Fight Forever, they add a new classic stories mode where we, the player, can reenact storylines from the actual AEW show, just like No Mercy did. And with that out of the way, let me give you a quick couple of tips. The way to unlock Big Show, otherwise known as Paul White in AEW, you're supposed to play through the Road to Elite and lose a few matches until you get to the fourth section of the story mode, which will be a story where someone is playing a prank on you. And in the third week of that story mode, you're gonna run into Big Show, and you have to defeat him within 3 minutes in order to unlock him. To unlock Owen Hart, you have to have 100 one-on-one match victories in exhibition mode. Road to Elite matches are not going to count for this. Then check the shop to see if they're available to buy. Oh yeah, one more aside here. Why can women win the men's championships, but men cannot win the women's championships? It makes no sense. If we're being genderless, then go all out with it, you know? In fact, if we're going to go genderless, then why have gender championships at all? It feels too silly to me. My opinion, don't allow women to win the men's championships, and if you do, then the men should be able to win the women's championship belts as well. Like, I don't know, it makes sense to me. Now, let's move on to the game's creation suite. Okay, I'm not gonna mince words here. The creation suite in AEW Fight Forever is not good. If you're expecting to delve deep into the creation mode and make an exact clone of Stone Cold Steve Austin or yourself, then that ain't gonna happen. The creation mode in AEW simply does not have the level of depth that we've come to expect from top-of-the-shelf wrestling games. The creator mode here is worse than the one in SmackDown vs. Raw 2007, which was a freaking PSP game. I know it sounds like I'm being harsh, but I look at it like this. AEW is a new company and their gaming division had to build this engine from scratch. You know, I get that. So I'm willing to give them a pass here. If WWE came out with a creation mode like this though, there'd be zero excuse for it. But since it's AEW and it's their first time around the virtual wrestling ring, I'll wait patiently for any updates in the future that bring much needed changes to the creation mode. The types of changes I'd love to see include more facial presets, more hair options, more options in general for attire, and the ability to go in depth in customizing the appearance of your character's facial features, like the size and width of their nose, eyes, beards, and all the little silly things like that. As far as match types go, I'm not too disappointed myself. I think there's a decent amount, but the fact that you can't do tornado tag is a bit odd. Those have been a staple of wrestling games since even before the N64 games, I believe. So overall, the current state of the game leaves quite a bit to be desired in several areas, particularly the creation suite, gameplay stability, and match options. But don't think that this game is not worth your time. As a Nintendo Switch outing, it's the best wrestling game available when it comes to pure wrestling mechanics. It is bar none the best on the Nintendo Switch, and we're pretty much guaranteed support for the next few years, as the developers have pretty much stated as such. They are going to be working on additional features even for the customization mode and match types, one which has already been leaked and confirmed by Kenny Omega himself. So this game ain't going anywhere, and AEW Fight Forever will be a different beast when it's all said and done. My final review for the current version of the game is a 7 out of 10. I'm Switchplayed, done.